go continue to part 2. So this is about trauma effects and resiliency. So we just start off with this quote. I love this framework because it's about how what we're understanding trauma as is the overwhelming experience where someone is no longer able to cope with what has happened to them or what's starting to happen to them. So it's related to extreme stress. And I think even if you feel that maybe you haven't had traumatic experiences in your personal life, all of us have experienced stress. And I think of stress and trauma on a continuum, right? Like things that jar us, that make us uncomfortable. There's this continuum all the way over to the overload point, which is the trauma point. So what happens to an individual when they experience a traumatic event? Well, there's some kind of stimulus in the environment. They sense that danger. Then if the person is receiving what happened with that stimulus as a traumatic event, their body and their brain are going to start doing all these things to prepare a response. Essentially, it's your brain and your body going into survival mode. So non-essential things that your body usually puts energy into are kind of going offline. They're going to go on the back burner. And then you get an external response, which you might have heard of before as the fight, flight, or freeze response. There's also some new research coming out around the fawn response, which is the attempt to appease the thing that is threatening you. So if you've ever felt scared and you felt like being really nice to the scary person, that's the appease response. So I want to take a couple minutes and just watch this clip from YouTube. This is from a TED Ed talk. And it gets into the physiology of stress and trauma a little bit, and how it affects brain function, memory, and even gene expression. So we're going to watch this together. It's just a few minutes.
Are you sleeping restlessly, feeling irritable or moody, forgetting little things, and feeling overwhelmed and isolated? Don't worry, we've all been there. You're probably just stressed out. Stress isn't always a bad thing. It can be handy for a burst of extra energy and focus, like when you're playing a competitive sport or have to speak in public. But when it's continuous, the kind most of us face day in and day out, it actually begins to change your brain. Chronic stress, like being overworked or having arguments at home, can affect brain size, its structure, and how it functions, right down to the level of your genes. Stress begins with something called the hypothalamus-pituitary-adrenal axis, a series of interactions between endocrine glands in the brain and on the kidney, which controls your body's reaction to stress. When your brain detects a stressful situation, your HPA axis is instantly activated and releases a hormone called cortisol, which primes your body for instant action. But high levels of cortisol over long periods of time wreak havoc on your brain. For example, chronic stress increases the activity level and number of neural connections in the amygdala, your brain's fear center. And as levels of cortisol rise, electric signals in your hippocampus, the part of the brain associated with learning, memories, and stress control, deteriorate. The hippocampus also inhibits the activity of the HPA axis, so when it weakens, so does your ability to control your stress. That's not all though. Cortisol can literally cause your brain to shrink in size. Too much of it results in the loss of synaptic connections between neurons and the shrinking of your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that regulates behaviors like concentration, decision-making, judgment, and social interaction. It also leads to fewer new brain cells being made in the hippocampus. This means chronic stress might make it harder for you to learn and remember things, and also set the stage for more serious mental problems like depression and eventually Alzheimer's disease. The effects of stress may filter right down to your brain's DNA. An experiment showed that the amount of nurturing a mother rat provides its newborn baby plays a part in determining how that baby responds to stress later in life. The pups of nurturing moms turned out less sensitive to stress because their brains developed more cortisol receptors, which stick to cortisol and dampen the stress response. The pups of negligent moms had the opposite outcome, and so became more sensitive to stress throughout life. These are considered epigenetic changes, meaning that they affect which genes are expressed without directly changing the genetic code. And these changes can be reversed if the moms are swapped. But there's a surprising result. The epigenetic changes caused by one single mother rat were passed down to many generations of rats after her. In other words, the results of these actions were inheritable. It's not all bad news, though. There are many ways to reverse what cortisol does to your stressed brain. The most powerful weapons are exercise and meditation, which involves breathing deeply and being aware and focused on your surroundings. Both of these activities decrease your stress and increase the size of the hippocampus, thereby improving your memory. So don't feel defeated by the pressures of daily life. Get in control of your stress before it takes control of you.
All right, so that segues us into trauma resiliency, which is a term you might have heard. So what is resiliency? What do we mean when we say that? In short, it's the process of adapting well in the face of adversity. Sometimes we think of this as bouncing back, but it can also be kind of profound long-term change that people go through. And the good news is that it involves skills and behaviors that most people can learn. So it doesn't have to be something that you come out of your childhood equipped with or to do. So when we're talking about trauma resiliency, really what we're talking about is these core components. So processing the trauma, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in this module, but that also involves like connecting with others and having healthy patterns of thinking about yourself, the world, and others, and also meaning making. Meaning making, I think of as kind of like the description for what you see a lot, maybe in your own life, in your family's life, or in the world, when people take the hard things they've been through and they translate it into a sense of purpose for themselves. That is one of the key components of resiliency.